"You're too big. It hurts," she whispered. As the Mafia boss kissed her bruised hands, in silence, the fluorescent lights of the Riverton Community Clinic always hummed with a frequency that only Elena Carter seemed to hear. It was a high, thin sound, like a wire pulled until it was ready to snap. For most of the staff, the clinic was just a job, a place of squeaking rubber shoes and the smell of antiseptic floor cleaner. For Elena, it was a sanctuary she had built brick by brick over the last decade of her life. At 31 years old, Elena had mastered the art of becoming invisible while standing in the center of a room. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her hands gentle but firm as she guided patients through the painful process of rebuilding atrophied muscles. She was good at her job because she understood pain. She knew how it lived in the body, how it curled around bones and settled into the marrow, waiting to flare up when the weather changed or when a voice was raised too loud. The Tuesday afternoon, the clinic was busy. The waiting room chairs were filled with workers from the shipyard and elderly residents from the nearby housing projects. Elena was working with Mrs. Higgins, a grandmother recovering from a hip replacement, when the front door of the clinic slammed shut with a violence that shook the frosted glass pane. Elena froze. It was a reaction she had never been able to train out of herself, a remnant of a childhood spent walking on floorboards that felt like landmines. The sound of a slamming door was the prelude to the shouting, and the shouting was the prelude to the breaking of glass and the bruising of skin. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat for a split second before she forced herself to exhale. She looked up, expecting to see a threat. Instead, it was just a gust of wind catching the heavy door as a young mother wrestled a stroller inside. "I am fine," Elena told herself, the mantra automatic. "I am safe. He is dead. He cannot hurt me anymore." She turned back to Mrs. Higgins with a practiced smile, though her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the height of the walker. She pushed the memory of her father down, burying it beneath the professional veneer she wore like armor. She was Elena, the physical therapist. She fixed broken things. She did not let herself remain broken. Across the city, the atmosphere was different. Though the undercurrent of tension remained the same, the Vantage nightclub sat on the edge of the financial district, a monolith of black glass and steel that seemed to swallow the light around it. Inside, the bass of the music was a physical weight, thumping against the chests of the wealthy patrons who filled the VIP booths. But in the soundproof office on the top floor, the air was still and cold. Adrian Villano sat behind a desk made of reclaimed mahogany, his dark suit tailored to fit a frame that was broad and imposing. He was not a man who needed to raise his voice to be heard. At 35, he carried the weight of the Villano family empire with a terrifying, stoic grace. He controlled the docks that fed the city its commerce, the security contracts that protected its buildings, and the gambling dens that bled its desperate citizens of their spare cash. Two men sat across from him. They were sweating, despite the chill in the room. "We are just asking for a route," one of the men said, his voice cracking. "Just through the East End docks. We move the product. You get 20%. It is clean." Adrian picked up a crystal tumbler of water, taking a slow sip, his eyes dark and unreadable, fixed on the speaker. "I told you last month," Adrian said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the desk. "And I told you the month before that nothing goes through my docks that hurts women or children. No trafficking, no heavy powders. It is just business." "Adrian," the second man pleaded. "The money is not worth the dirt," Adrian finished. He set the glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood was soft, but the men flinched as if it were a gunshot. "Get out and tell your boss that if I see one of his trucks near my shipyard again, I will not burn the truck. I will burn the driver." The men scrambled to leave, the heavy door clicking shut behind them. Adrian exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. He stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over Riverton. The city was a grid of lights and shadows, a living thing that he kept breathing through sheer force of will. He was a criminal. He knew that. He was a monster to the polite society that pretended he did not exist. But he had rules, in a city that wanted to eat itself alive. He was the one holding the leash. The next day brought a storm of gray clouds and a new patient to Elena's schedule. His name was Marco, and he looked less like a construction worker and more like a slab of granite that had been roughly chiseled into the shape of a man. He walked with a heavy limp, and his left arm was in a sling. When Elena called his name, he stood up with a groan, clutching his side. She led him to the examination table, her instincts already firing warnings. The bruising on his ribs was not consistent with the fall from a ladder he claimed on his intake form. It looked like the result of a pipe or a boot. "Deep breath for me." "Marco," Elena said, placing her stethoscope against his chest. He inhaled sharply, his jaw tight. "This hurts," he grumbled. "You have severe bruising and likely a hairline fracture," Elena said, keeping her tone neutral. "You should be resting, not walking around." "Cannot rest," Marco said, his voice rough. "Work to do. The boss relies on me." "Your boss should understand that you are injured," Elena countered gently, moving to check the range of motion in his shoulder. Marco let out a short, dark laugh. "Mister, Villano understands loyalty. He takes care of his own, but he does not like weakness. I am not weak." Elena paused. The name Villano was not spoken loudly in Riverton, but everyone knew it. It was whispered in coffee shops and plastered across the crime beat section of the newspaper, usually accompanied by words like alleged and investigation. She looked at Marco with new wariness. He was one of them. A soldier in a war she wanted no part of. She finished the session with professional detachment, giving him a sheet of exercises and icing his shoulder. But as the clock ticked toward evening and the clinic began to empty, she felt a lingering unease. The sun had set by the time Marco was ready to leave. The parking lot lights were flickering, casting long, jumping shadows across the asphalt. "I will walk you to your car," Marco said, buttoning his heavy jacket with his good hand. "It is late. That is not necessary." "Marco," Elena said, pulling her coat tighter around herself, "you are the patient." He shook his head stubbornly. "My mother raised me right. Miss Carter. I walked the lady to her car, especially in this part of town." Elena sighed but nodded, too tired to argue. They walked out into the cool night air. The street was quiet. Save for the distant sound of traffic on the highway, they reached her sedan, a reliable, dented thing she had driven for 6 years. "Thank you." "Marco," she said, unlocking the door. "Please do the exercises. If you do not let those muscles heal—" The sound of an engine roaring to life cut her off. It was a deep, guttural growl that came from the alleyway across the street. Elena turned her head just as a black sedan screeched out of the darkness. Its headlights blinded her. Time seemed to warp, stretching and snapping all at once. She saw the back window of the car roll down. She saw the glint of metal under the street lamp. "Get down!" Marco roared. It was not a thought that moved her. It was pure instinct. Honed by years of surviving a volatile household, she did not freeze this time. She moved. As the first crack of gunfire shattered the silence, Elena threw herself at Marco. He was twice her size, but he was injured and slow to react. She shoved him with every ounce of strength she possessed, knocking him off balance and behind the engine block of her car. Elena fell with him, but she was not fast enough to clear the gap completely. She hit the asphalt hard, her palms slapping against the rough, unforgiving ground to break her fall. The skin on her hands tore instantly, a sharp, searing fire that shot up her arms. Pop, 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 pop. The sound was deafening. Bullets sparked against the pavement and punched through the metal of the car door inches above her head. Glass shattered, raining down like diamonds. Elena curled into a ball, pressing her face into the dirty asphalt, her hands throbbing. Her breath coming in jagged gasps. She could hear Marco grunting in pain beside her, swearing in Italian. Then, another sound joined the chaos, tires screeching from the other side of the lot. 2 SUVs surged into the parking lot, cutting off the attackers. Men in dark clothing spilled out, weapons drawn. There was a brief, intense exchange of gunfire, loud, terrifying bursts that made Elena cover her ears and squeeze her eyes shut. And then, Silence. The attacking car peeled away, tires smoking, leaving the smell of burnt rubber and gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. Elena lay trembling on the ground. Her hands were burning. She pulled them away from her face and saw them in the dim light. Her palms were raw, the skin shredded and bleeding, embedded with grit and gravel from the road. "Miss Carter?" Marco's voice was strained. Elena pushed herself up to her knees, her vision swimming. Are you alive?" Marco was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his jacket. But he nodded. "Because of you. You are crazy, lady. You are crazy." Two of the men from the SUVs were suddenly there. They moved with military precision. One knelt by Marco, applying pressure to his wound. The other looked at Elena. He was terrifying, wearing a tactical vest, but his voice was calm. "Ambulance is 5 minutes out," he said into a radio clipped to his shoulder. "Secure the perimeter." Elena looked at her hands again. The blood was dark and shiny. She began to shake, the adrenaline crashing out of her system and leaving her cold and hollow. She had just been in a shootout. She was a physical therapist. She helped people walk again. She did not dive away from bullets. The next 2 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed voices, the ambulance ride, the triage nurse, the sting of antiseptic as they cleaned the gravel from her palms. She sat on the edge of a hospital bed, her hands heavily bandaged, looking like white boxing gloves. Detective Miller entered the room without knocking. He was a man who looked like he had been gray for 20 years, his suit ill-fitting and his eyes tired and cynical. He did not look at Elena with sympathy. He looked at her like she was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. "So, Miss Carter," Miller said, flipping open a notebook, "you want to tell me how a physical therapist ends up in the middle of a mob hit?" "I was walking a patient to the car," Elena said, her voice sounding small in the sterile room. "A patient. Marco Rossi, a known associate of the Villano family." Miller stepped closer, his presence invading her space. "You know who Adrian Villano is, don't you?" "Everyone knows the name," Elena whispered. She hated the way he was looking at her, as if she were guilty of something. "You jumped in front of him," Miller said. "Witnesses say you shoved him to cover. That is a lot of loyalty for a physical therapist. You sure you were just rubbing his shoulder, Miss Carter? Or are you running messages for him too?" Elena flinched. The accusation was absurd, but the threat in his voice was real. "I saved a patient. I did not know who was shooting. I just reacted." Miller leaned down, placing his hands on the rails of the bed. "We are going to catch the shooters." "Sure, but I am more interested in the men in the SUVs, the ones who showed up to clean up the mess. You saw them. You saw faces." "I did not see anything," Elena said, her heart racing. "I had my eyes closed. I was terrified." Miller stared at her for a long moment, his gaze dissecting her. "If you are protecting them, you are going down with them. The Villanos are a cancer. And when we cut it out, we take the healthy tissue around it too, if we have to." He snapped his notebook shut and walked out, leaving Elena shaking. She felt smaller than she had in years. The system that was supposed to protect her felt like another predator, circling, waiting for a moment of weakness. She stared at the door, trying to steady her breathing. 1, 2, 3, in, out. The door opened again. Elena jerked back, pulling her knees to her chest, expecting the detective to return. It was not Miller. The man who entered the room seemed to absorb all the oxygen in the confined space. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against a charcoal suit that cost more than Elena made in a year. His hair was dark, brushed back from a face that was severe and striking. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds. It was Adrian Villano. He stopped just inside the door. The hallway behind him was curiously empty, the bustle of the hospital silenced as if his presence demanded a perimeter. He looked at Marco's bed, which was empty. Marco had been taken to surgery, and then his gaze shifted to Elena. He didn't move for a moment. He just looked at her. He took in the pallor of her skin, the smudge of dirt on her cheek that the nurses had missed. And then his eyes dropped to her hands. Elena felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. She instinctively pulled her bandaged hands against her chest, wincing as the movement pulled at the raw skin. She saw his jaw tighten, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was deep, a baritone that resonated in the small room. It was quiet, controlled, but there was an intensity beneath it that made the hair on her arms stand up. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Who are you?" she asked, though she knew. "Adrian Villano," he answered. He took a step closer, moving with a predator's grace, silent despite his size. "I came to check on Marco. I was told you were the one who pulled him out of the line of fire. I pushed him," Elena stammered. She felt a bizarre urge to apologize. It was instinct. Adrian stopped at the foot of her bed. He was close enough now that she could smell him. Sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and the crisp scent of rain. He was terrifying. He was the reason there were bullet holes in her car. He was the reason her hands were shredded meat. And yet, he was looking at her hands with an expression that was not anger. It was something else, something bordering on reverence. "The police were here," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elena whispered. "What did you tell them?" Elena looked up at him. She saw the danger in him. She knew that the wrong answer could be the end of her. But looking at him, seeing the strange stillness in his posture, she felt the same odd sensation she had felt when she shoved Marco, a need to protect the silence. "I told them I saw nothing," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I told them I had my eyes closed. I told them nothing about your men." Adrian studied her face. He seemed to be searching for a lie, waiting for the crack in her resolve. When he didn't find one, the tension in his shoulders eased. "Just a fraction, thank you," he said. The words were simple, but the weight he put behind them made Elena's breath hitch. He wasn't dismissing her. He wasn't paying her off. He was acknowledging a debt. "You are hurt," he said, gesturing vaguely to her hands. "Because of my business. I will heal," Elena said, looking away. "It is just skin." Adrian moved to the side of the bed. He was too close now, his presence overwhelming. He was too big for the room, too big for her small, contained life. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers, but he did not touch her. He seemed to understand, without being told, that she would flinch if he moved too fast. "I am sorry that violence found you today, Elena," he said, using her first name. It sounded intimate, foreign on his tongue. "But know this, I do not forget when someone protects what is mine." He held her gaze for 1 second longer, his eyes burning into hers, and then he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving the room feeling suddenly cold and empty. Elena sat in the silence, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Later that night, back in her small apartment, sleep refused to come. Her hands were throbbing, a dull, pulsing ache that synchronized with her heartbeat. She had taken the painkillers the doctor prescribed, but they didn't touch the noise in her head. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the pop, pop, pop of the gunfire. She felt the rough asphalt scraping her skin off. But then, the image would shift. She would see the hospital room. She would see Adrian Villano standing at the foot of her bed. She remembered the way the detective had looked at her, like she was trash, like she was guilty by association. And she remembered the way Adrian had looked at her bandages. He had looked at her as if her pain mattered. She turned over in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the streetlight stretching across the plaster like long, dark fingers. She was terrified. She knew that by lying to the police. She had stepped 1 foot into a world that swallowed people whole. She knew she should run. She should pack a bag and leave Riverton. But as she drifted into a fitful, uneasy sleep, the fear was tangled with something else. A strange, treacherous warmth. For the first time since she was a child hiding in a closet from her father's rage, she didn't feel entirely exposed. She had stood between a monster and his death, and the monster had looked back at her and promised that he wouldn't forget. Elena pulled the duvet up to her chin, tucking her bandaged hands safely against her chest. The city outside was loud and dangerous, but in the quiet of her room, The memory of his low voice lingered like a ghost. "I do not forget when someone protects what is mine." She wondered, with a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold, what it would feel like to be considered his. The fear Elena carried was not a loud, screaming thing. It was a low-frequency hum, a vibration in the floorboards of her life that she had learned to ignore until the moment the floor dropped out from under her. 3 days after the shooting, the clinic felt less like a place of healing and more like a trap. Every car that slowed down outside the front window made Elena flinch. Every time the bell above the door chimed, her heart hammered a panicked rhythm against her ribs. Her hands were still heavily bandaged, white gauze wrapped thick around her palms, making simple tasks like typing notes or adjusting a patient's brace clumsy and painful. She was in the break room, struggling to open a bottle of water with her fingertips, when the front reception called her name. "Elena, there is a detective here to see you again." Elena froze. The bottle slipped from her grip and hit the linoleum with a loud clatter. She stared at it for a second, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth. "I am coming," she called back. Detective Miller was waiting in the small consultation room. He did not look like a man interested in justice. He looked like a man interested in closing a file, regardless of who got crushed in the process. He was leaning against the examination table, arms crossed, his suit jacket straining at the seams. "Sit down, Miss Carter," Miller said. "I prefer to stand," Elena replied, hugging her arms around herself. She kept her bandaged hands tucked into her armpits, hiding the evidence of her vulnerability. Miller sighed, a wet, rattling sound. "We have been looking into your background. Elena, quiet life, strict father, no priors. You pay your taxes on time. You look like a model citizen." "I am a model citizen," Elena said, her voice tight. "Then why are you protecting a man like Adrian Villano?" Miller asked, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I told you," Elena said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I do not know him. I was treating a patient. That is all." Miller pushed off the table and took a step toward her. The space in the room seemed to shrink. "We have footage from the street. Grainy, but clear enough. We see Villano's men showing up seconds after the shooting starts. They were waiting. Elena, and you were right in the middle of it." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. "You are a loose end, Miss Carter. The Rinaldi family, the ones who shot up your parking lot, they do not leave loose ends. And neither do we. If you do not give me a name, if you do not sign a statement saying you saw Villano's men return fire, I can charge you with obstruction. I can charge you as an accessory to gang violence." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "You cannot do that. I am a victim here. I can do whatever gets scum like Villano off the street," Miller sneered. "Think about it. Prison is a hard place for a girl who jumps at slamming doors." He tossed a business card onto the table. It landed with a soft slap. "You have 24 hours to remember what you saw." Miller walked out, leaving the door open. Elena stared at the card, her vision blurring. The system that was supposed to help her was twisting her arm behind her back. She felt cornered, the walls of the small room pressing in on her until she couldn't breathe. She stumbled out to the reception desk, needing air, needing to leave. But as she reached for her purse, the front door opened again. It wasn't Miller. This man was younger, dressed in a sharp navy suit that fit him with military precision. He had dark hair and eyes that scanned the room with a practiced, lethal efficiency before landing on her. Elena recognized him instantly. He had been one of the men in the SUVs, the one who had called for the ambulance. "Miss Carter," the man said. His voice was polite, smooth, and completely non-negotiable. Elena took a step back, bumping into the filing cabinet. "Who are you?" "My name is Nico," he said, clasping his hands in front of him. "I work for Mr. Villano. He would like a word. I have nothing to say to him," Elena said, her voice shaking. "Please leave. The police were just here." "I know," Nico said calmly. "We saw Detective Miller leaving. That is why I am here." He took a step forward, not aggressive, but with the inevitable momentum of a tide. "The police are pressing you. The Rinaldis know you survived. You are in a very difficult position. Miss Carter, Mr. Villano wants to clear things up. In a safer location. I am not going anywhere with you, Elena insisted. Though her resolve was crumbling under the weight of her fear, Nico looked at her with a strange kind of pity. You can stay here, where the police will arrest you or the Rinaldis will finish what they started. Or you can come with me. Speak to Adrian and let him fix this. It is your choice. But the car is waiting. Elena looked out the window. The street looked the same as it always did, but now every shadow looked like a gunman, and every siren sounded like a cage door slamming shut. She realized with a sinking heart that she had no choice at all. Fine, she whispered. The drive was silent. Nico drove a black sedan with tinted windows that turned the sunny afternoon into a perpetual twilight. They drove toward the city center, past the bustling markets and the high-rise banks, until they pulled into the underground garage of the Vantage building. They took a private elevator to the top floor. When the doors slid open, Elena stepped into a space that smelled of leather and ozone. It was an office, but it looked more like a fortress. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the sprawling gray grid of Riverton. Adrian Villano was standing by the window. He turned as they entered, without the chaotic backdrop of a hospital. He was even more imposing. He wore a white dress shirt with the top button undone, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like they could crush stone. But his face was composed, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Nico," Adrian said. "Leave us." Nico nodded and disappeared back into the elevator, leaving Elena alone with the man who had turned her life upside down. "Please sit," Adrian said, gesturing to a leather chair in front of his desk. "I will stand," Elena said again. It felt like her only scrap of control. "Why did you bring me here?" Adrian walked over to his desk and leaned against the edge of it, crossing his ankles. He looked relaxed, which only made Elena more nervous. "The detective." "Miller," Adrian said. "He threatened you." "How do you know that?" Elena asked. "I make it my business to know when the law tries to break innocent people to get to me," Adrian replied. He watched her carefully. "The Rinaldi family, the ones who attacked Marco, they are not done. The attack was sloppy. They failed to kill Marco, and they left a witness." A witness who saw nothing," Elena argued, her voice rising. "It does not matter what you saw," Adrian said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a rumble that she felt in her chest. "It matters that you were there, in their eyes. You are associated with me, now. And that puts a target on your back." Elena felt a flare of anger cut through her fear. She took a step toward him, forgetting her caution. "Associated with you? I am a physical therapist. I fix knees and shoulders. I pay my rent. I do not belong in your world. You dragged me into this." "I did not drag you," Adrian said calmly. "Fate did. And now I am trying to keep you from being collateral damage. I do not want your protection," Elena shouted, the frustration boiling over. "I want my life back. I want to go to work without shaking. I want to sleep without seeing guns. You people, you play your games and you destroy everything you touch. You are just as bad as them." Adrian went very still. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He stood up from the desk, unfolding his full height. Elena wanted to retreat, but she held her ground, breathing hard, her chest heaving. "I am nothing like them," Adrian said softly. His eyes were dark, intense, burning with a cold fire. "The Rinaldis traffic in poison. They hurt women. They hurt children. I did not choose this system, Elena. I did not choose a city where the police are bought and sold like cheap suits, but I live in it, and I refuse to let it crush the people under my protection. And am I under your protection?" Elena challenged, though her voice wavered. "Or am I just a loose end you are trying to tie up?" Adrian looked at her then. Really looked at her. He looked at the fear in her eyes, the defiant set of her jaw, and the way her bandaged hands were trembling at her sides. The anger drained out of his face, replaced by something that looked like regret. "You are shaking," he murmured. Elena looked down at her hands. They were vibrating, tremors running from her wrists to her fingertips. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her weak. "I am scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. Adrian stepped closer. He moved slowly, telegraphing his intent so as not to startle her. He reached out and took her hands in his. His hands were massive, warm and rough with calluses. He didn't grip her hard, he simply cupped her bandaged palms, his touch light, steadying her. Elena's breath hitched. She should have pulled away. He was a criminal. He was dangerous. But the warmth of his skin seeped through the gauze, grounding her. Adrian looked down at her hands, then up into her eyes. His thumb brushed over the back of her fingers, a feather-light stroke that sent a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. It was a tender, non-demanding touch, completely at odds with the violence of his world. "I cannot give you your old life back," Adrian said quietly. "That door is closed, but I can keep you alive until I open a new one." Elena stared at him, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. He was too close. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She could feel the steady, powerful heat radiating from him. "What are you offering?" she whispered. "You cannot go back to your apartment," Adrian said, his thumb still tracing soothing circles on her skin. "It is not safe. I have a penthouse here, the top floor, secure, guest suite. You stay there, a few nights, until I deal with the Rinaldis. Live." "With you?" Elena asked, her eyes widening. "With me, but not with me," Adrian corrected. "The suite is separate. You will have privacy. You will have security. No one gets in this building unless I allow it." Elena looked at her hands, still held in his. She thought of her empty apartment, the flimsy lock on the door, the shadows in the hallway. She thought of Detective Miller's threat. She realized with a sickening clarity that the safest place in Riverton was standing right in front of her, holding her broken hands. "I have a cat," she said absurdly, her mind grasping for a reason to say no. "Nico will fetch the cat," Adrian said, without missing a beat. Elena let out a shaky breath. She felt like she was stepping off a cliff, hoping there was water at the bottom and not rocks. "Okay," she whispered. Adrian squeezed her hands gently, then let them go. The loss of his warmth was immediate and jarring. "Good," he said. 2 hours later, Elena stood in the center of the guest suite. It was beautiful, in a cold architectural way, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, a bed that looked like a cloud, but she could see the reality beneath the luxury. The windows were reinforced glass, thick enough to stop a bullet. There were cameras discreetly placed in the hallways. She walked out into the main living area. It was vast, open concept, with a sunken living room and a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. But as she moved deeper into the space, she saw cracks in the perfection. A worn leather jacket was draped over the back of a pristine white armchair. A stack of hardcover books sat on a side table, not arranged for display but piled haphazardly, with bookmarks sticking out of them. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the counter next to a set of keys. It was lived in. It was a home, not just a fortress. Elena felt like an intruder. She clutched her small overnight bag, her knuckles white. She was walking into the lion's den, and the lion had left his jacket on the chair. Night fell over the city, turning the view outside the windows into a sea of glittering lights. Elena could not sleep. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, heavy and suffocating. She put on a thick robe over her pajamas and wandered out of her room. She found the glass doors to the balcony and slid one open. The wind was cold, biting at her cheeks, but she welcomed it. It felt real. She walked to the railing and looked down. The cars below were tiny specks of light, moving through the veins of the city. Could not sleep? Elena jumped, spinning around. Adrian was standing in the shadows of the doorway. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the strong column of his throat. He held 2 glasses of water. "I did not mean to disturb you," Elena said, pulling her robe tighter. "You didn't," Adrian said. He walked over and held out a glass. Elena took it with her bandaged hand. "Careful not to drop it. Thank you." Adrian leaned against the railing next to her, looking out at the city. He didn't speak for a long time. He seemed content to just exist in the silence with her. It was unnerving. Men usually wanted something from her. Conversation, validation, Reassurance. Adrian seemed to want nothing. "Your hands," Adrian said softly, not looking at her. "They are hurting?" "They throb," Elena admitted, "but the painkillers make me foggy. I prefer the pain." Adrian turned his head to look at her. His gaze dropped to her wrist. The sleeve of her robe had slipped up as she held the glass, revealing a faint, jagged white line against her pale skin, an old scar. "And those?" he asked. "Do they still hurt?" Elena froze. She quickly pulled her sleeve down, covering the mark. It was an instinct she had honed over years. "Hide the damage. They are old," she said defensively. "I know," Adrian said. His voice was devoid of judgment. It was just a statement of fact. "Who gave them to you?" Elena stared into her water glass. The liquid trembled, reflecting the city lights. She never talked about this. Not to her friends, not to her colleagues. "Someone who said he loved me once." She whispered. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "My father. He had a temper. And he drank. When he was angry, everything was a weapon." She waited for the pity. She waited for the awkward shifting of weight, the platitudes about how strong she was. Adrian did not move. He did not look away. "He should have protected you," Adrian said. His voice was low, hard as iron. A man's only job is to stand between his family and the world, not to be the thing they fear. Elena looked up at him. His face was in profile, sharp and severe against the night sky. He looked angry, but not at her. He was angry for her. "He is dead now," Elena said. "It does not matter. It matters." Adrian corrected her. He turned fully toward her, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You have spent a long time being afraid, haven't you, Elena?" Elena couldn't answer. The lump in her throat was too large. "You are in my house now," Adrian said. His voice was a vow, deep and resonating in the cold air. "As long as you are here, you're safe. No one raises a hand to you ever again. Not the Rinaldis, not the police, no one." He reached out, and for a second Elena thought he was going to touch her face. She held her breath, her heart hammering, but he just took the empty glass from her hand and set it on the railing. "Go to sleep, Elena," he said gently. "I will be awake." He turned and walked back into the shadows of the apartment, leaving her alone on the balcony. Elena stood there for a long time, the cold wind whipping her hair around her face. She touched her wrist, tracing the scar through the fabric of her robe. She felt a strange sensation in her chest, something fragile and terrifying unfurling like a leaf. For the first time in her life, the monster in the dark wasn't trying to hurt her. He was standing guard at the door, and that, she realized with a shiver that had nothing to do with the wind, was the most dangerous thing of all. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was as seductive as it was terrifying. Elena felt like a diver adjusting to the pressure of the deep ocean. The air was thinner here, the stakes higher, and every movement felt heavy with consequence. She continued to work at the clinic, though the parameters of her life had shrunk to the back seat of a black armored sedan. Each morning, Nico drove her to the clinic, his eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror. Two men she did not know sat in a car across the street from the clinic entrance, watching the door for 8 hours until Nico returned to shuttle her back to the penthouse. It was a gilded cage, but Elena could not deny that it was warm, inside the penthouse. The silence she had initially feared began to fill with small, quiet notes of domesticity. Adrian was often gone during the day, dealing with the invisible currents of his empire, but he was always there when she woke up, and he was always there when she returned. One morning, Elena walked into the kitchen to find Adrian standing by the espresso machine. He was dressed in a dark gray suit, his jacket draped over a chair, looking out at the city skyline. Without turning around, he slid a ceramic mug across the granite counter toward her. 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk. He said. Elena stopped, surprised. She picked up the mug. "It was perfect. How did you know?" she asked. "I pay attention," Adrian replied, turning to lean against the counter. He took a sip of his own coffee. Black as tar. "You stir your coffee 3 times when you are thinking. You prefer the blue mug over the white one. And you hate the sound of the news in the morning." so I left the television off." Elena felt a flush rise in her cheeks. It was unnerving to be observed so closely, yet there was no predatory intent in his gaze. It was the same way he looked at contracts or architectural blueprints, seeking to understand the structure of things. That evening, over takeout from a Thai place 3 blocks away, the tension in the room shifted again. They were eating at the kitchen island, the formality of the dining table feeling too vast for just the two of them. "This is too spicy," Adrian remarked, frowning at his basil chicken. Elena laughed, a sound that surprised her. "It says 3 chilies on the menu. Adrian, that is the universal sign for danger. You run a criminal empire, but you cannot handle a chili pepper?" Adrian looked at her, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. A slow, genuine smile broke across his face, transforming his severe features into something breathtakingly handsome. "My sister used to say the same thing," he said, his voice softening. "She has a tongue made of iron. She used to challenge me to eating contests when we were kids. I always lost." Elena leaned forward, intrigued. "You have a sister?" Adrian nodded, looking down at his plate. "Julia. She's 10 years younger. She lives in Paris now. She teaches art history." "She got out?" Elena asked softly. "I pushed her out," Adrian corrected. "When our father died, I made sure she was on the first plane to Europe. I told her never to come back to Riverton unless I was dead." The hardness in his voice was back, but it was brittle. Elena saw the cost of his power then, the loneliness he had curated to keep the people he loved safe. "She misses you," Elena said. It was not a question. "I hope she forgets me," Adrian replied. "It is safer that way." The fragility of that moment lingered, weaving a thread of connection between them that Elena was afraid to pull on. 2 nights later, a storm rolled in off the coast. It was a true Riverton squall, turning the sky a bruised purple in lashing rain against the reinforced glass of the penthouse. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and then, with a sharp crack of thunder, the city grid below flickered and died. The penthouse plunged into darkness. Elena gasped, freezing in the middle of the living room. The sudden absence of light brought the memories of her childhood rushing back, the sound of her father stumbling in the dark, the crash of objects breaking. "I am here." Adrian's voice came from the darkness, deep and grounding. A moment later, the flare of a match illuminated his face. He moved around the room, lighting thick pillar candles that sat on the mantel and the coffee table. The golden light softened the sharp angles of the modern furniture, turning the vast room into an intimate, hushed cave. "Come, sit," Adrian said, gesturing to the sofa. Elena sat, tucking her legs under her. Adrian sat on the other end, close enough that she could feel the radiant heat of his body, their knees almost touching. The storm raged outside, but in the circle of candlelight, the world was still. "Do you hate the storms?" Adrian asked, watching the shadows dance on the wall. "I used to," Elena admitted. "The noise, it makes me jump, but up here it feels far away, like watching a movie." "What did you want to be?" Adrian asked suddenly, "before the world told you who you had to be?" Elena looked at her hands, the bandages finally gone, leaving pink, healing skin. "I wanted to be a painter," she whispered. "I loved the smell of turpentine and oil paints. I wanted to capture quiet moments, people sitting on park benches, sunlight hitting a glass of water, boring things." "That is not boring," Adrian said. "It is peaceful." "What about you?" Elena asked. "Surely you did not dream of running docks and nightclubs." Adrian looked into the flame of the nearest candle. "I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things that would last. Bridges, libraries, places where people could feel safe." Elena looked at him, seeing the ghost of the boy he might have been. "You still build things," she said. "You built this sanctuary. I built a fortress," Adrian corrected. "There is a difference." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the unspoken things that had been growing between them for days. Elena looked at him, the sharp line of his jaw, the heavy brow, the hands that could break bones but had held her own damaged fingers with such tenderness. "I wanted a simple love," Elena confessed, the words slipping out before she could check them. A man who came home at 5, a small house, no guns, no bodyguards, but, Adrian prompted, turning to face her fully. But I feel broken now, she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. I am too guarded. I flinch when people move too fast. I am not built for a simple love anymore. I think the fear is part of my DNA now. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then, with a slowness that was agonizing, he moved closer. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, waiting for her permission. When she did not pull away, he cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. You are not broken, Elena, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are a survivor, and survivors are the fiercest things on this earth. He looked at her mouth, his intent clear. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a mix of terror and a longing so sharp it hurt. She didn't move. She wanted this. She wanted to know what it felt like to be touched by a man who saw her scars and didn't look away. Adrian leaned in, giving her every second to stop him. When his lips finally brushed hers, it was not the demanding, conquering kiss she had expected from a man of his power. It was a question. It was soft, searching, and devastatingly gentle. Elena let out a small, shaky breath against his mouth. She closed her eyes, her hands coming up to rest lightly against his chest, beneath the silk of his shirt. She could feel the steady, powerful thud of his heart. It was a heavy rhythm, like a war drum, but it was beating for her. The kiss deepened, Adrian's hand sliding to the back of her head, his fingers threading into her hair. He cradled her skull as if she were made of fine porcelain, holding her precious, holding her safe. He tasted of scotch and rain. For a moment, Elena forgot the Rinaldis. She forgot the police. She forgot the fear that had ruled her life for 20 years. There was only the heat of him, the size of him, wrapping around her like a shield. But then, the reality of who he was crashed back in. His gun, holstered at his side, pressed against her hip, the weight of his world, the violence that was sewn into the lining of his life, suddenly felt suffocating. Elena pulled back, gasping for air. She scrambled to the far end of the sofa, her eyes wide. I cannot, she whispered. Adrian froze. He did not chase her. He stayed exactly where he was, his hand falling to his side. Elena, he said, his voice strained. You are too big, she said, her voice trembling. Not just physically. Your life, your war. It is too big. I am not built for this. Adrian, I will crack. I will shatter. She was shaking again. The desire was still there, burning in her veins, but the fear was colder and stronger. Adrian's jaw tightened, the muscles bunching as he fought for control. He looked at her with an intensity that seared. I will never break you, he vowed. I will burn this city to ash before I let anything hurt you, even if that thing is me. He stood up, the movement abrupt. I will check the generator, he said, his voice void of emotion. He walked into the darkness of the hallway, leaving Elena alone with the flickering candles and the ache of his absence. The next morning, the fragile piece of the penthouse was shattered. Elena woke to the sound of Adrian on the phone in the living room. He was speaking Italian, his voice a low, furious growl. She walked out to see him pacing, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a look of pure violence on his face. He ended the call and threw the phone onto the couch. It bounced and landed on the floor. What happened? Elena asked, her stomach twisting. They torched the warehouse on 4th Street, Adrian said, not looking at her. My men were inside. 2 are in critical condition. Elena covered her mouth. Oh God, that is not all, Adrian said, turning to her. His eyes were cold, distant. My contacts in the police tell me that the Rinaldis have been paying for surveillance on your clinic. They know your schedule. Elena. They know when you arrive and when you leave. The room seemed to spin. Elena grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. You are not going back there, Adrian stated. What? Elena asked. You are taking a leave of absence, indefinitely. I will pay your salary. I will make a donation to the clinic to cover the cost of a replacement therapist, but you are not stepping foot outside this building until I end this. No, Elena said. The word came out instinctively. Adrian stepped closer, his dominance filling the room. It is not a request. Elena, you cannot just lock me up. Elena shouted, the fear turning into anger. That clinic is my life. My patients depend on me. I have worked for 10 years to build something that is mine. You cannot just buy it off like you buy everything else. I am trying to keep you alive. Adrian roared back, his control finally snapping. Do you think I care about your independence right now? I care that there are men with semi-automatic weapons waiting for you to walk out that door. Elena recoiled as if he had slapped her. Then you are just like him. She spat, her voice shaking. You just want to control me. You think because you have money and power, you can just move people around like chess pieces. Adrian went pale. The comparison to her father hit him like a physical blow. He took a step back, his hands curling into fists at his sides. I am not him, he said, his voice deadly quiet. But if being a tyrant is what it takes to stop you from dying in a gutter, then I will be a tyrant. He turned and walked out the front door, the heavy lock clicking shut with a sound of finality. Elena stood in the silence, her chest heaving. She was furious. She was insulted. But beneath the anger, a cold, icy terror was spreading. She wasn't just afraid for herself. She was thinking of Mrs. Higgins. She was thinking of the receptionist, Sarah, who had a baby. If the Rinaldis attacked the clinic because of her, the guilt crushed her. She ran to the guest bathroom and locked the door, sliding down to the floor. She pulled her knees to her chest and buried her face in her arms. The tears came hot and fast, racking her body with silent sobs. She felt trapped by the Rinaldis, trapped by the police, trapped by Adrian's overwhelming protection. She didn't know how much time passed before she heard the front door open. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moved through the apartment. They stopped outside the bathroom door. Elena. Adrian's voice was soft again. Go away, she choked out. There was a pause. Then, the lock clicked. Adrian had a key. Of course he had a key. The door opened. Elena didn't look up. She pressed her face harder into her knees, ashamed of her weakness. Adrian didn't speak. He didn't tell her to get up. He didn't tell her to stop crying. He walked into the small room and sat down on the cold tile floor next to her. He was wearing a $3,000 suit, and he sat on the bathroom floor without a second thought. He extended his legs and leaned his head back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. I am sorry I shouted. He said. Elena sniffled, wiping her eyes on her sleeve. You are a jerk. I know, Adrian agreed. I'm used to people doing what I say. I'm not used to this. Used to what? Elena whispered. Having something to lose that I cannot protect with a gun, Adrian said. Elena looked at him. He looked exhausted. The lines around his eyes were deep. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man holding up the sky, terrified that if he let go, it would crush her. She shifted, leaning her head against his shoulder. It was a surrender, but not a defeat. Adrian didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. His grip was firm, grounding. He smelled of smoke and the cold city air. We will figure it out, he murmured into her hair. I promise. Elena closed her eyes, letting herself lean into the shelter of his body. She hated that she needed it. She hated that it felt so good. They sat there for a long time. The Mafia boss and the physical therapist huddled together on the bathroom floor while the city outside sharpened its knives. Eventually, Adrian helped her up. They walked back into the living room. The atmosphere shifted again. The anger was gone, replaced by a weary, battle-worn intimacy. Adrian went to check the front door locks, his nightly ritual. He paused. What is it? Elena asked, seeing his back stiffen. Adrian crouched down, lying on the floor. Just inside the threshold was a small, cream-colored envelope. It had been slipped under the door. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. How? You said this place was a fortress. You said no one could get up here. Adrian stood up slowly, the envelope in his hand. His face was a mask of cold fury. Someone on the inside, he whispered. Someone betrayed us. He opened the envelope. He didn't want to show her. She could tell. But she stepped forward and snatched it from his hand. Inside were 3 photographs. The first was of Elena walking out of the clinic 2 days ago. The second was of Elena sitting in the back of Nico's car, taken through the window. The third was a picture of the penthouse building, with a red circle drawn around their balcony. There was a note, handwritten in elegant looping script. "She looks fragile. How much does she mean to you?" Elena dropped the photos, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't breathe. The illusion of safety shattered into a million pieces. The walls of the penthouse were not thick enough. Adrian was not big enough. Adrian caught her as she stumbled back. He pulled her against his chest, burying her face in his jacket so she wouldn't have to look at the thread on the floor. But she could feel the tension radiating off him. He was vibrating with a rage so dark, so violent that it terrified her more than the photos. They were inside. Adrian whispered, his voice sounding like grinding stones. They were right outside the door. He held her tighter, his grip bruising. "This ends now," he vowed into the silence of the room. No more hiding, no more defense. Elena clung to him, listening to the war drums of his heart beating faster and faster. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one Adrian was about to unleash. The envelope on the floor had changed everything. The penthouse, once a sanctuary of silence and glass, transformed overnight into a war room. The air, previously filled with the scent of rain and coffee, now smelled of ozone and gun oil. Men in tactical gear moved through the hallways with the silent efficiency of ghosts, their faces grim and unreadable. Adrian Villano sat at the head of the dining table, which was now covered in blueprints, maps of the city, and lists of names. He was a terrifying study in cold precision. He spoke in low, clipped tones to Nico and his other lieutenants, moving assets around the board like a grandmaster playing a game where the pieces were human lives. "Secure the shipping lanes on the East River," Adrian commanded, his voice devoid of inflection. "Pull the security detail from the casinos and triple the perimeter here. I want a 5-mile radius surveillance net. If a squirrel crosses the street, I want to know about it." Elena stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching him. She felt like a ghost in her own life. She was the reason for this activity. She was the epicenter of the storm. Yet she was being kept behind the glass, untouched and uninformed. "Adrian," she said. He did not look up. "Nico, get the accounts in the Cayman Islands ready to move. We might need liquid assets if the banks freeze up." "Adrian," Elena said, louder this time. He finally stopped, his hand pausing over a map of the warehouse district. He looked up at her, and for a second the mask slipped. His eyes were red-rimmed, burning with exhaustion and a fear he refused to voice. "Go back to the suite." "Elena," he said gently, "this is not for you." "I am not a child," Elena replied, walking into the room. The men around the table shifted uncomfortably, looking to their boss for cues. "Tell them to leave." Adrian stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he nodded once to his men. "Give us 5 minutes." The room cleared instantly, leaving them alone in the vast, tension-filled space. "Talk to me," Elena demanded. "What are you planning? You are moving money. You are moving men. What are you going to do to them?" "I am going to handle it," Adrian said, standing up and walking to the window. His back was a wall of muscle, tense and unyielding. "You do not need to know the details." "I do need to know," Elena cried, her frustration boiling over. "They are using me to get to you. I am the leverage. That makes it my business. You are planning to kill people, aren't you? You are planning a massacre. I am planning survival," Adrian said, turning around. His face was hard, carved from granite. "They threatened you. They came to my door. There is no negotiation anymore. There is only removal." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, feeling a chill that the climate control could not banish. "It is too much." "Adrian, all of this, the guns, the guards, the constant threat of death, you treat me like I am made of glass, like I am just some fragile object you have to put in a vault, because you are fragile," Adrian snapped, the volume of his voice making her flinch. "Compared to this world? Compared to men who will cut off a finger to send a message? Yes. Elena, you are fragile. And thank God for that. I do not want you to be hard. I do not want you to be like me. I am not a partner to you, Elena said, her voice shaking. I am just another asset, another thing you own. That is not true, Adrian said, stepping toward her. It feels true, Elena countered, holding up a hand to stop him. Your world is too big. Adrian, it is massive and heavy, and it crushes everything it touches. It is crushing me. I cannot breathe in here. I cannot breathe knowing that people are going to die because of me. Adrian stopped. The hurt flashed across his face, raw and unguarded. He looked down at his hands, the hands that held the fate of the city, and then back at her. I know, he whispered. His voice was cracked, stripped of its usual authority. I know I am too much. I know my life is a burden, but I cannot be anything else. Elena, I cannot shrink. If I shrink, we both die. And he looked so lonely then, a king standing in the ruins of his own making, that Elena's anger deflated, leaving only a hollow ache. I need to remember who I was before this, she said softly. Before I was a target. Before I was a loose end. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing amidst his maps and his plans. A powerful man who could command an army but could not stop the woman he loved from feeling like a prisoner. 2 hours later, the penthouse felt suffocating. Elena paced the guest suite, her skin itching with the need to do something, anything to prove that she still had agency. She thought of her father. It was a twisted impulse. She knew. Frank Carter was the source of her original pain. He was the reason she flinched at loud noises. But he was also real. He was a problem she understood. Unlike the faceless Rinaldi hitmen, if she could face him, if she could stand in front of him and not be afraid, maybe she could believe that she was strong enough to survive Adrian's world. She waited until the shift change. She knew the schedule now. Nico was busy with Adrian in the study. The hall guard was a young man named Leo, who had a kind face and had once asked her about physical therapy for his grandmother. Elena opened the door. Leo snapped to attention, his hand drifting to his earpiece. Miss Carter, he said, you should be inside. Leo, please, Elena said, keeping her voice low and desperate. I just need air. I need to go for a walk, just for an hour. I cannot do that. Miss Carter, Leo said, looking nervous. Mister, Villano gave strict orders. Adrian is stressed, Elena said, stepping closer. He is fighting a war. I am adding to the pressure. I need to go see my father. He is sick. It will take 1 hour. Please, if you tell Adrian, he will just worry. I will be back before anyone notices. Leo hesitated. He looked at the pleading in her eyes, saw the exhaustion etched there. He was young, and he still believed that people were generally safe if they weren't involved in the business. Take the service elevator, Leo whispered, checking the hallway. Take a taxi, not a ride share. Call me the second you are heading back. Thank you. Elena breathed. She slipped out, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a wild, reckless feeling of freedom as she hit the street. She hailed a cab and gave the address of the crumbling apartment complex on the south side of Riverton. The building smelled of stale beer and boiled cabbage. The hallway lights flickered, buzzing like trapped flies. Elena stood in front of Unit 4B, her hand raised to knock. Her wrist throbbed where the scar lay hidden under her sleeve. She knocked. Come in. It is open, a rough voice yelled from inside. Elena pushed the door open. The apartment was exactly as she remembered it. Yellowed walls, a television blaring a game show, empty bottles cluttering the coffee table. Frank Carter sat in a recliner that had seen better decades, nursing a tumbler of cheap whiskey. He looked up, his eyes bleary and bloodshot. Well, look who it is. The prodigal daughter returns. Hello. Dad, Elena said, standing in the doorway. She refused to step further in. She wanted the exit at her back. To what do I owe the honor? Frank sneered, taking a swig of his drink. Come to tell me how much better you are than me? Living in the high-rises? I saw the news. Elena, saw the reports about that shootout. I just wanted to see you, Elena said, her voice steady. I wanted to see if you were okay. I am fine, Frank spat. I'm always fine. But you are in deep, aren't you? Always did like dangerous men, just like your mother. She liked the bad boys too, until one of them broke her heart. I am nothing like her, Elena said, feeling a flare of old anger. And Adrian is nothing like you. Frank laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Adrian, first name basis with the Don? Oh, that is rich. You think he is different because he wears a suit? He is a killer. Elena, just like me. We are all the same. We take what we want. He stood up, swaying slightly. He moved toward her, and Elena's body seized up. The old instinct to shrink, to hide, flooded her veins. He walked right up to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of sweat and alcohol, the scent of her nightmares. You think you are special? Frank hissed, reaching out. You think you can change a man like that? He grabbed her wrist. His grip was hard, punishing. He squeezed right over the old scar, his fingers digging into the tender flesh. Elena gasped, the pain sharp and immediate. The room seemed to tilt. For a second, she was 7 years old again, watching him raise a belt. But then she remembered Adrian. She remembered his thumb brushing her knuckles. She remembered him sitting on the bathroom floor with her. She looked at her father, and she didn't see a monster. She saw a small, sad, hateful old man. Let go, Elena said. Frank sneered, squeezing harder. Or what? You will cry? No, Elena said. She shoved him. It wasn't a gentle push. She put her weight into it, slamming her palms against his chest. Frank, drunk and off balance, stumbled backward. He hit the edge of the recliner and fell into it with a grunt of surprise. Elena stood over him, her chest heaving. I am not afraid of you anymore, she said, her voice ringing clear in the shabby room. And I deserve better than this. I deserve better than you. She turned and walked out. She didn't run. She walked. Tears were streaming down her face, hot and fast, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release. She had faced the ghost in the closet, and he was just a man. She stepped out of the apartment building into the cool evening air. The street was quiet. She reached into her pocket for her phone to call Leo. A black van screeched around the corner. Elena looked up, the phone halfway to her ear. The side door of the van slid open before it even came to a complete stop. 2 men jumped out. They wore ski masks and dark clothes. Elena turned to run, but she was too slow. A hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around. She screamed, but a gloved hand clamped over her mouth, stifling the sound. She fought. She kicked and scratched, her fingernails tearing at the fabric of their clothes. She managed to free one arm and swung wildly, hitting one of the men in the throat. He grunted but didn't let go. Get her inside, one of them shouted. They shoved her toward the open door. Elena twisted, trying to drop her weight, trying to be dead weight. Her phone slipped from her fingers. It hit the pavement with a sickening crunch, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of glass. She was thrown into the back of the van. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The tires squealed as the vehicle sped away, leaving nothing behind but a broken phone on the sidewalk, back at the penthouse. The silence was broken by the sound of a door slamming open. Leo ran into the study, his face pale as death. Mr. Villano. Adrian looked up from his desk. He saw the look on the boy's face, and he knew. The blood in his veins turned to ice. Where is she? Adrian asked. His voice was very quiet. She said she needed to see her father. Leo stammered. She said she would be back in an hour. She took a taxi. I tracked her phone, but the signal just died. Adrian stood up. The chair behind him fell over with a crash. Get the footage, he roared. Now. 3 minutes later, they were in the security center. The wall of monitors showed the feed from a traffic camera near Frank Carter's apartment. Adrian watched in silence. He watched Elena walk out of the building. He saw her reach for her phone. He saw the van. He saw the struggle. He saw how she fought. He saw her disappear into the dark maw of the vehicle. Adrian watched the van drive away. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He placed his hands on the edge of the metal console. He squeezed. He squeezed until the metal groaned. He squeezed until the skin over his knuckles split, white bone pushing against red flesh. Blood began to drip onto the floor. Dark and heavy drops. Boss, Nico whispered, looking at Adrian's hands. "Find them," Adrian said. The sound was not human. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. "Find them, and bring me my gun." Elena was dragged out of the van and into a building that smelled of rust and damp earth. A bag had been pulled over her head, blinding her. She stumbled, her knees scraping against concrete, but rough hands hauled her back up. She was pushed into a chair. Her hands were wrenched behind her back, rope biting into her wrists. Right over the fresh bruises her father had left, the hood was ripped off. Elena blinked against the sudden harsh light. She was in a warehouse. It was cavernous, filled with shadows and abandoned machinery. In front of her stood 3 men. In the center was a man she recognized from the news, Silvio Rinaldi. He was older than Adrian, with a face that looked like it had been eroded by acid. He wore a sharp suit, but his eyes were dead. "So, this is the prize," Rinaldi said, stepping closer. He looked Elena up and down with a sneer. "She's pretty, fragile-looking. I can see why Adrian likes her. He always did have a soft spot for broken things." Elena straightened her spine. She was terrified. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a hummingbird trapped in her chest. But she remembered Adrian's voice. "Survivors are the fiercest things on this earth. I am not a prize," Elena said, her voice raspy. Rinaldi laughed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of photos. He tossed them into her lap. Elena looked down. They were photos of bodies, men she didn't know, lying in pools of blood. "This is what happens to people who stand next to Adrian Villano," Rinaldi said pleasantly. "This is his legacy. Death. And you are next, sweetheart, unless he gives us what we want." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "We are going to make a video. You are going to cry. You are going to beg him to give up the North Docks. You are going to beg him to give us the names of his captains. And if you do a good job, maybe I will only break one of your pretty hands." Elena looked at him. She looked at the cruelty in his eyes. She thought of her father, small and drunk in his chair. This man was no different. He was just a bully with a bigger playground. She thought of Adrian. She thought of how he had held her hands like they were holy. She thought of how he used his power to build walls around the people he loved, not to crush them. "I will not beg," Elena said. Rinaldi's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I said I will not beg," Elena repeated, louder this time. "You think you understand power. You think power is about how many people you can hurt, how many people you can break." She looked him dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of the strength she had borrowed from Adrian. "Power is not about breaking people," she said. "Power is measured by how many people you protect. Adrian knows that. That is why he is a king. And you are just a butcher." Rinaldi's face turned purple. He raised his hand and struck her across the face. The blow snapped Elena's head to the side. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. Her cheek throbbed with a fiery heat, but she didn't cry out. She turned her head back, spitting blood onto the concrete floor, and stared at him with defiance. Rinaldi stared at her, stunned by her resistance. Then he smiled. "A cruel, jagged thing. We will see how long that lasts," he said. Back in the penthouse, the sun had set. The city was a sea of darkness. Adrian stood in his office. The lights were off. He was staring at his reflection in the reinforced glass of the window. He looked like a stranger. His eyes were black holes, his hands, bandaged now by a trembling Nico, hung at his sides. He knew where they were. His team had triangulated the van's route, an abandoned industrial park on the edge of the river. He knew what he had to do. Negotiation was over. Strategy was over. He turned away from the window. He walked to the desk and picked up his gun, sliding it into the holster. He was going to go to war. He was going to wash the streets of Riverton in blood. He was going to do things that would make Elena look at him with horror for the rest of her life. He knew that saving her might mean losing her. She would see the monster he truly was. She would see the violence he was capable of. But as he walked toward the elevator, flanked by 20 of his most lethal men, Adrian knew he would pay that price. He would let her hate him, as long as she was alive to do it. "Burn it down," Adrian whispered to the empty air. "Burn it all down." The air in the penthouse had changed. It no longer smelled of rain or expensive leather. It smelled of ozone and inevitability. The time for mitigation was over. The time for war had arrived. Adrian stood at the head of the heavy mahogany table in his study. A map of Riverton spread out before him like an autopsy report. His lieutenants, men with faces carved from stone and eyes that had seen too much, stood in a semicircle, waiting. Adrian looked at them, but he did not see them. He saw the empty space where Elena should have been. He saw the ghost of her presence in the room, the way she would have frowned at the violence, the way she would have tried to reason with him, but reason had been taken from him when the van doors slammed shut. "We are not going to lay siege them," Adrian said, his voice a low, flat line that terrified his men more than his shouting ever could. "A siege takes too long. We are going to bleed them. We are going to cut their arteries until they are lightheaded and desperate." He pointed to 3 red circles on the map. "Here, here, and here. The laundromat on 5th, the private card room behind the bakery, and the distribution hub near the old rail yard. These are the veins of the Rinaldi cash flow." Nico stepped forward, his expression grim. "Hitting all 3 at once is dangerous, boss. It leaves our flanks exposed. If they counterattack, let them try." Adrian cut him off, his eyes cold and dead. "I want these places burned. I want their money turned to ash. I want their product confiscated or destroyed. I want Silvio Rinaldi to pick up his phone and hear nothing but static and screaming. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we force them to the table before the sun comes up." The men nodded, sensing the vibration of pure, focused rage radiating from him. They scattered to prepare, leaving Adrian alone in the room. He checked his watch. Midnight. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a burner phone. There was only one number programmed into it. He pressed call. It rang twice before a tired, gravelly voice answered. "I told you not to call this line unless bodies were dropping," Detective Miller said. "Bodies are about to drop," Adrian replied, staring at his reflection in the darkened window. "But not the ones you care about." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you want?" "Villano?" "I am giving you the Rinaldi stash house on 4th Street, Adrian said. "Drugs, guns. Enough cash to make your captain look like a hero on the morning news. It is a gift." Miller laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "And what is the price tag on this gift? For the next 2 hours, your patrol cars stay west of the river," Adrian said. "Between 1st Avenue and the Industrial District, the police are blind and deaf." "That is a big ask," Miller said, his voice dropping. "If shots are fired—" "Shots will be fired," Adrian interrupted, "but it is criminals killing criminals." "Miller, you call it a gang war. I call it taking out the trash. You get the credit for the bust on 4th Street, and you let me clean up the mess on the river." Silence stretched between them. Adrian could hear the detective breathing, weighing the corruption against the career advancement, weighing the morality against the reality of Riverton. 2 hours, Miller said finally. "But if a civilian gets scratched, I am coming for you with the National Guard." Adrian ended the call and snapped the phone in half. He tossed the pieces into the wastebasket. The board was set, the police were neutralized, the soldiers were moving. Now, all he had to do was pray that Elena could hold on in the damp, suffocating darkness of the warehouse. Elena was trying to breathe. She was tied to a metal chair in the center of a large, empty room. The ropes around her wrists were tight, biting mercilessly into the fresh bruises her father had left earlier that evening. The pain was a constant, throbbing rhythm, but she welcomed it. The pain kept her focused. It kept her from sliding into the panic that was clawing at the edges of her mind. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow light over the concrete floor. 2 men stood guard by the metal door, smoking cigarettes and speaking in low, rough Italian. They ignored her, treating her like a piece of luggage they were waiting to check. Elena closed her eyes. She needed to go somewhere else. She needed to escape this room. She summoned the memory of the penthouse. She thought of the smell of Adrian's coffee in the morning. She thought of the way the leather of his jacket felt under her fingertips. She thought of the night on the balcony, when he had stood between her and the wind. I do not forget when someone protects what is mine. The words echoed in her mind, a mantra against the fear. He had claimed her. It was a possessive, archaic concept that she had fought against, but now, in the dark, it felt like a lifeline. He considered her his, and Adrian Villano did not lose things. "Hey," one of the guards called out. He flicked his cigarette butt onto the floor and walked toward her. He was young, with a cruel mouth and eyes that gleamed with malice. "You awake? Princess?" Elena opened her eyes and looked at him. She did not lower her gaze. The guard laughed. "You got fire. Silvio said you had fire. Shame we have to put it out." He reached out and grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back. Elena gasped at the sudden pain, her neck straining. "You think he is coming for you?" the guard sneered, his face inches from hers. "You think the great Adrian Villano cares about a little physical therapist? He's probably cutting a deal right now, trading your life for a shipping container of heroin. He's not like you," Elena said. The words forced out through gritted teeth. The guard's expression darkened. He released her hair and, in a flash of movement, backhanded her across the face. The force of the blow rocked the chair. Elena tasted copper. Her cheek, already swollen from Rinaldi's strike earlier, throbbed with renewed agony. Tears pricked her eyes, involuntary and hot, but she bit the inside of her lip to keep from crying out. "He hit me," she thought, the realization cold and sharp. "No one raises a hand to you ever again." The memory of Adrian's promise washed over her, not as a comfort but as a source of strength. She looked back at the guard. She saw the uncertainty in his eyes. He expected her to beg. He expected her to break. "Is that all you have?" she whispered. The guard raised his hand again, anger flushing his face, but the other man at the door barked an order. "Leave her! Enzo! Silvio wants her conscious for the video." The guard lowered his hand, sneering at her one last time before turning away. Elena let out a shaky breath, her head hanging forward. She was terrified. She was in pain, but she was not broken. She was Elena Carter. She had survived a violent father. She had survived a shootout. She would survive this. She imagined Adrian's hand on her back, steadying her. She imagined his heartbeat. She held on to those sensations like a drowning woman holding onto a piece of driftwood, waiting for the tide to turn. The tide turned at 1 a.m. Adrian's war began with 3 simultaneous explosions that rocked the foundations of the Rinaldi Empire. At the laundromat, a delivery van packed with accelerant crashed through the front window. At the card room, masked men stormed the back entrance, seizing the cash cages and smashing the slot machines. At the distribution hub, a fire broke out in the main office, consuming ledgers that detailed a decade of criminal activity. It was surgical. It was brutal. It was a message written in fire. Adrian sat in the passenger seat of an armored SUV parked 3 blocks from the river, monitoring the chaos over a secured radio frequency. "Target 1 secure." A voice crackled. "Target 2 secure. Cache secured. Target 3 is burning. No casualties on our side." Adrian did not smile. This was just the preamble. He was waiting for the phone to ring. 10 minutes later, it did. He looked at the screen. It was a video call request from an unknown number. Adrian accepted the call. The screen filled with the image of a dimly lit room. In the center, tied to a chair, was Elena. Adrian felt his heart stop. It physically stopped beating in his chest. She looked battered. Her hair was messy, sticking to her forehead with sweat. Her left cheek was swollen and purple. There was a cut on her lip, but it was her hands that made bile rise in his throat. They were tied behind her, but he could see the way her shoulders were wrenched back, the angle suggesting a cruel tightness that must have been agonizing on her healing injuries. "Adrian?" Elena's voice came through the speaker. Tinny and weak. "Do not come. It is a trap. Someone off camera hit her." Elena cried out, her head snapping to the side. Adrian's hand crushed the door handle of the SUV. "I am going to kill you," he said to the screen, his voice a low, demonic growl. "I am going to peel the skin from your bones." Silvio Rinaldi's face stepped into the frame. He looked sweaty and manic. The fires across the city had rattled him. "You are causing me a lot of trouble, Adrian," Silvio said by shouting over the poor connection. "My accountant is crying. My warehouse is burning. This is very rude. Let her go," Adrian said. Silvio laughed, pulling a gun and pressing the barrel against Elena's temple. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, but she did not beg. "You want her back?" Silvio asked. "You want your little pet? Then you stop the attacks. You pull your men back, and you come to the old storage facility on River Road, alone. No guards, no guns, just you. If you touch her again," Adrian began. "I will shoot her in the head right now if you do not agree," Silvio screamed, the veneer of control cracking. "You have 20 minutes. Come alone or I send her to you in pieces." The screen went black. Adrian stared at the blank phone. The image of Elena with a gun to her head was burned into his retinas. The sound of her cry was echoing in his ears. He opened the door of the SUV and stepped out into the cool night air. Nico was waiting by the hood of the car. He had heard the shouting. "Boss?" Nico asked tentatively. "Pull the men back," Adrian said. "What?" Nico asked, shocked. "We have them on the ropes. We can finish this." "Pull them back!" Adrian roared, slamming his fist onto the hood of the car. The metal dented under the impact. "He wants a trade. Me for her." Nico shook his head frantically. "It is a trap. Adrian, you know it is a trap. You walk in there alone. You do not walk out. We can rush the place. We can—" "She will be dead before you get through the door," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He stepped closer to Nico, gripping the younger man's shoulder. "You are in charge of the perimeter. If I am not out in 30 minutes. You burn the place to the ground, with everyone inside." "Adrian, please," Nico pleaded. Adrian turned away. He walked to the trunk of the SUV and opened it. He ignored the heavy assault rifles and the tactical vests. Instead, he reached for a small, concealed ankle holster and a single combat knife. He stripped off his suit jacket and tossed it into the back seat. He rolled up his sleeves. He needed to move fast. He needed to be light. He paused for a moment, leaning against the back of the car. He closed his eyes. A memory washed over him, unbidden and overwhelming. It was 3 nights ago. The storm had passed, but the city was still quiet. He and Elena were in the living room. The power was back on, but they had left the lights off, preferring the soft glow of the city through the windows. They were lying on the massive leather couch. It was the first time they had touched without fear or urgency. Elena was lying on her back, her head resting on his chest. He had one arm wrapped around her, his hand tracing slow, calming circles on her spine. He could feel her breathing. He could feel the tension slowly leaving her body, replaced by a heavy, trusting drowsiness. "Do you think," Elena had whispered, her voice sleepy, "that there are people who do not lock their doors?" "Somewhere," Adrian had answered, his chin resting on the top of her head. "In small towns, in the middle of nowhere. I would like that," she had murmured. "A house with a screen door that slams shut, a porch, and no locks, just open. I will buy you a house like that." Adrian had promised. Elena had shifted, looking up at him in the half-light. Her eyes were soft, unguarded. "You would be bored. No empires to run, no wars to fight. I would have you," Adrian had said. "That is enough." She had smiled then, a small, sad smile that broke his heart. "It is a nice dream." Adrian. The memory faded, leaving him standing in the cold parking lot. Adrian opened his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was old. The edges frayed. It showed a man, a woman, and 2 children standing in front of a bakery. His parents, his sister, and him, smiling, before the world had turned him into a weapon. He ran his thumb over the faces. He had lost them. He had failed to protect them from the life he was born into. He would not fail Elena. He put the photo back in his pocket, right over his heart. "If the cost of her life is my blood," he whispered to the silence, "then I will pay it." He slammed the trunk shut. "I am going in," he said to Nico. He turned and walked toward the dark, looming silhouette of the storage facility. He walked with a steady, purposeful stride, a man marching toward his own execution, driven by a love that was terrifying in its intensity. Inside the warehouse, The atmosphere had shifted. The guards were nervous. They could hear the distant sirens. They knew that Adrian Villano was coming. And the reputation of the man was enough to make even hardened killers sweat. Elena was roughly pulled from the chair. "Move!" Silvio barked, grabbing her arm. She stumbled, her legs numb from sitting so long. "Where are you taking me?" "Shut up," Silvio hissed. He dragged her through a maze of corridors, deeper into the complex. They entered a smaller room, a loading bay that smelled of grease and old water. He shoved her into a corner, behind a stack of crates. 2 guards stood over her, guns drawn. "Stay down," Silvio ordered. "If you make a sound, I will kill you myself." He turned and walked back toward the main open area of the loading bay. Elena huddled in the corner. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She heard a heavy metal door slide open in the distance. She heard the echo of footsteps. Adrian, he was here. Terror and relief warred in her chest. She was terrified that he had walked into a slaughter. She was relieved that she wasn't alone. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, "please be the monster they are afraid of." Adrian stepped into the loading bay. It was a vast, cavernous space, shadows stretching long and deep in the corners. The only light came from a few industrial floodlights mounted high on the walls. The space was empty, save for a single wooden chair placed in the absolute center of the room. Facing the chair was a tripod with a camera mounted on it, and next to the camera was a large speaker on a stand. It was a stage. Adrian stopped 10 feet inside the door. He scanned the room, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He saw the movement in the shadows of the rafters. Snipers. He saw the subtle distortion of the air behind the crates. Hidden gunmen. He was walking into a firing squad. He didn't care. "Where is she?" Adrian called out. His voice echoed off the metal walls, calm and commanding. Static crackled from the speaker. Then, Silvio's voice filled the room, amplified and distorted. "Welcome, Adrian," the voice boomed. "You are right on time." Adrian stood still, his hands loose at his sides, seemingly relaxed. But every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to snap. "I am here," Adrian said. "Alone. Now bring her out." Silvio laughed over the speaker. "So impatient. We've not even discussed the terms of your surrender yet. Take a seat. Adrian, sit in the chair." Adrian looked at the wooden chair. It was positioned perfectly in the crosshairs of every hidden gunman in the room. If he sat down, he was dead. He looked at the camera. He looked straight into the lens, his gaze piercing through the technology to the man watching on a screen somewhere in the building. "I am not sitting," Adrian said, "and I am done negotiating. You have 1 minute to show me she is alive, or I start killing your men. I do not care how many of them you have hidden in the dark. I will find them." There was a silence from the speaker. Then, a low, angry buzzing sound. "You are in no position to make threats," Silvio screamed, his voice cracking with feedback. "You are in my house. You live or die because I say so." Adrian took a step forward. He moved with a slow, predatory grace. "Then kill me," he challenged, "but know that my men are outside. If I die, this building burns. We all die. Silvio, is that what you want, or do you want to live to spend the money you stole?" The speaker clicked. "Bring her out," Silvio shouted to someone off microphone. A door to the right opened. Elena was shoved out into the open. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the concrete. "Elena!" Adrian shouted, his composure cracking. She looked up. Her face was bloody, her eyes wide with fear, but she was alive. Adrian took a step toward her, but a bullet sparked off the concrete inches from his foot. "Ah, Silvio's voice taunted. "Stay where you are." Adrian froze. He looked at Elena. He looked at the guards stepping out of the shadows, guns trained on him. He looked at the camera. "Whether she walks out of here, or whether she dies on this floor," Silvio said, his voice dripping with malice, "depends entirely on what you are willing to sacrifice in the next 60 seconds. Drop your weapons, Adrian, on your knees, or she dies." Adrian looked at Elena. She shook her head slightly, tears streaming down her bruised face. "No," she mouthed. Adrian looked back at the camera. He slowly reached down and pulled the knife from his ankle holster. He tossed it onto the ground. It clattered loudly in the silence. He slowly knelt on the concrete floor. He put his hands behind his head. He was surrendering. He was giving himself up. But as he knelt, his eyes locked with Elena's. And in that gaze, he sent her a silent message, a message that said, "Wait, be ready." Silvio laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound that echoed through the loading bay. Finally, he crowed, the king of Riverton on his knees. The sound of a door opening signaled Silvio's entrance. He was coming out to gloat. He was coming to claim his victory. And Adrian, muscles bunched and adrenaline flooding his veins, waited for the exact moment the devil walked into the light. Silvio Rinaldi stepped out of the shadows, a wide, triumphant grin stretching across his face. He held a pistol loosely in one hand, walking toward Adrian with the swagger of a man who believed he had already won. The loading bay was silent, save for the hum of the electric lights and the ragged breathing of the men holding guns on the perimeter. Adrian remained on his knees, his hands clasped behind his head, to the untrained eye. He looked defeated, a king stripped of his crown, kneeling in the dirt. But Elena, watching through a haze of pain and tears, saw what Silvio did not. She saw the tension in Adrian's shoulders, not of fear, but of a coiled spring waiting to release. She saw his eyes, dark and focused, tracking the distance between himself and the nearest guard. "You look good down there." "Adrian," Silvio sneered, "stopping 10 feet away. It suits you." Adrian did not speak. He was counting. 1, 2, 3. Silvio raised his gun, aiming it at Adrian's chest. "Say goodbye." "Adrian, 4. The world exploded. It did not come from the front door. It came from the walls. Shaped charges, planted by Nico's team during the chaos of the citywide fires, detonated simultaneously along the east wall of the warehouse. The metal buckled and shrieked, tearing open like wet paper. A cloud of concrete dust and debris blasted into the room, blinding the Rinaldi guards. In the same second, the skylights shattered inward as men in tactical gear rappelled down on ropes, their weapons spitting controlled bursts of fire. Adrian moved. He did not scramble for cover. He launched himself forward, a blur of motion in the chaos. He rolled, snatching his combat knife from the floor where he had dropped it, and came up in a crouch. "Get the girl!" Silvio screamed, his voice cracking with panic as he scrambled backward, firing wildly into the smoke. 2 guards grabbed Elena by her arms, hauling her off her feet. She kicked and screamed, but they were strong, dragging her toward a heavy steel door on the far side of the bay. "Adrian!" Elena screamed, the sound tearing through the cacophony of gunfire. Adrian heard her. The sound of her voice cut through the white noise of battle like a beacon. He turned, ignoring the bullets sparking off the concrete around him. He saw her being dragged into the dark corridor. He roared, a sound of pure, primal fury, and charged. A Rinaldi soldier stepped into his path, raising a shotgun. Adrian didn't slow down. He sidestepped the blast, the heat of it singeing his shirt, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him flying into a stack of crates. Adrian didn't stop to finish him. He sprinted for the door, diving through it just as it began to slide shut. The corridor beyond was a maze of pipes and shadows. The air tasted of rust and blood. Adrian ran, his footsteps heavy and fast. He could hear the scuffle of boots ahead, the sound of Elena struggling. He turned a corner and a bullet slammed into his side. It felt like a hammer blow. Ideally, the Kevlar vest under his shirt caught the slug, but the impact knocked the wind out of him and sent a shockwave of pain through his ribs. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. He looked down. The fabric was torn, and blood was seeping through, but he was still moving. He pushed off the wall, gritting his teeth. The pain was irrelevant. Pain was just information. And right now, the information was that he was running out of time. He reached a stairwell and took the steps 3 at a time. Above him, he heard a door slam open. He burst onto the roof-level landing, his chest heaving. The hallway ended in a single exit door leading to the exterior catwalks. He kicked the door open. The scene that greeted him froze the blood in his veins. They were outside, on a metal gantry overlooking the black, churning water of the river. The two guards were gone, likely having fled down the fire escape. Only one man remained. It was Enzo, the guard who had struck Elena earlier. He had Elena pinned against the railing. One arm was wrapped around her throat, choking her. The other hand held a pistol pressed hard against her temple. Elena's face was pale, her eyes wide and terrified. Her hands were still bound behind her back, leaving her defenseless. "Stop!" Adrian shouted, leveling his empty hands. Enzo spun around, using Elena as a human shield. "Back off. I will do it. I swear I will do it." Adrian stopped. He stood 10 feet away, the wind from the river whipping his hair across his face. He saw the tremor in Enzo's hand. He saw the desperation. A desperate man was the most dangerous thing in the world. "Let her go," Adrian said. His voice was calm, almost hypnotic, hiding the violent storm raging inside him. "The Rinaldis are done. Silvio is running. Look around you. The building is ours. There is no one coming to pay you." Enzo's eyes darted around frantically. "If I let her go, you will kill me." Adrian took a slow step forward. "If you hurt her, I will make your death last a week. But if you let her go, you walk away." Enzo hesitated. The gun wavered slightly against Elena's skin. Elena looked at Adrian. She saw the blood staining his shirt side. She saw the raw, terrifying focus in his eyes. He was bargaining for her life with nothing but his will. "I am walking out of here," Enzo spat, tightening his grip on Elena's throat, "and she is coming with me, until I am clear. Back up." He began to drag Elena toward the ladder at the end of the gantry. Adrian knew he couldn't let them reach the ladder. If they got down to the docks, he lost the angle. He lost the control. He looked at Elena. He locked eyes with her, pouring every ounce of reassurance he had into that single look. Then he looked past Enzo to the shadows of the roof access. He gave a microscopic nod. Nico was there. A blinding spotlight from the police helicopter, which Adrian had arranged through Miller, suddenly snapped on, bathing the gantry in brilliant, blinding white light. Enzo flinched, instinctively throwing a hand up to shield his eyes. In that split second of distraction, Elena dropped. She didn't just fall, she threw her dead weight toward the ground, twisting her body with the last of her strength. Enzo's grip on her neck slipped. The gun fired, the bullet singing harmlessly into the night sky. Adrian moved. He covered the 10 feet in a heartbeat. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He collided with Enzo, the force of the impact driving the man back against the railing. Adrian grabbed the hand holding the gun and twisted. There was a sickening crack, a scream, and the weapon clattered onto the metal grating. Adrian struck him once, a precise, brutal blow to the jaw that rendered Enzo unconscious instantly. The man slumped to the ground. Adrian spun around, his chest heaving, searching for Elena. She was curled on the metal grating, gasping for air. Adrian fell to his knees beside her. He pulled a knife from his belt and sliced the ropes binding her wrists. As soon as her hands were free, he pulled her into him. "Elena," he choked out, burying his face in her neck. I have you. I have you." Elena clung to him, sobbing. She felt the wetness of his blood on her hands, the heat of his body, the terrifying solidity of him. He was a wall, he was a fortress, and he was shaking. Down below, the shooting had stopped. The flashing lights of police cruisers were flooding the parking lot. Nico's voice crackled in Adrian's earpiece. "Boss, we have Rinaldi. He's cornered in the main office." Adrian pulled back, cupping Elena's face. "Are you hurt? Did he shoot you?" "I am okay," Elena wept. "I am okay." "You are bleeding." "It is a scratch," Adrian said, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Stay here. Nico is coming for you. I have to finish this." He stood up, his face hardening again. He looked at the unconscious man on the ground, then turned back to the door. "Adrian," Elena called out. He stopped, looking back at her. "Do not become him," she whispered. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and disappeared back into the building. He found Silvio Rinaldi in the dispatch office. The man was trying to shove cash into a duffel bag, sobbing with panic. When Adrian kicked the door open, Silvio shrieked and scrambled under the desk. Adrian walked over and kicked the desk over. exposing the cowering crime boss. "Please," Silvio begged, holding his hands up. "I will give you everything, the territory, the routes. Just let me go." Adrian stood over him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, clear clarity. He held his gun in his hand. It would be so easy. One bullet. One problem solved forever. He thought of Elena's voice. "Do not become him." He thought of the life he wanted to build, a life where he didn't have to look over his shoulder every second, a life where Elena could walk down the street without fear. If he killed Rinaldi now, the war would never end. Rinaldi's cousins would come, then his nephews. It was a cycle of blood that only stopped when someone put down the gun. Adrian holstered his weapon. Silvio looked up, confused. You are not going to kill me?" Adrian looked down at him with profound disgust. "No," Adrian said. "Death is too easy for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the burner phone he had used to call Detective Miller. He tossed it onto the floor next to Silvio. "The police are outside." "Silvio," Adrian said coldly, "in that bag, you have laundered money. In the next room, you have 3 tons of narcotics. And on that phone, there is a recording of you ordering the kidnapping of a civilian." Silvio's face went white. "You are ratting me out?" "You? We are men of honor." "There is no honor here," Adrian said. "There is just you and a cage for the rest of your miserable life." He turned and walked away, leaving Silvio Rinaldi to the sound of heavy boots thundering down the hallway as the SWAT team breached the building. When Adrian walked out of the warehouse, the night was chaotic with blue and red lights. Paramedics were treating the wounded. Police were shouting orders, but Adrian saw none of it. He saw only Elena. She was sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, a shock blanket wrapped around her shoulders. A medic was cleaning the cuts on her face. Adrian walked toward her. He felt heavy. Every step was an effort. The wound in his side burned, but the ache in his chest was worse. He had burned half the city to save her. He had exposed the darkness of his world to her. He stopped 3 feet away. He holstered his gun, the click loud in the sudden quiet between sirens. Elena looked up. Her eyes were red, her face bruised. She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the blood on his shirt, the soot on his skin, the sheer, terrifying size of him against the flashing lights. Adrian sank to his knees in front of her. He didn't care about the police watching. He didn't care about his men. "Elena," he said, his voice rough. Elena let the blanket slip from her shoulders. She reached out with trembling hands. Her wrists were raw, encircled by angry red welts from the ropes. Her knuckles were swollen. She touched his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "You are too big," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. Adrian flinched. He looked down, shame flooding him. "I know," he rasped. "I know I am." "No," Elena said, shaking her head. Tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the dust and dried blood. "It hurts, Adrian. It hurts to look at you. You burned everything down for me. The enormity of it. Your power, your world. It is like trying to hold a hurricane in my hands. I feel like I'm going to break just standing near you." Adrian said nothing. He couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. She was right. He was a hurricane, and he had almost destroyed her. He gently reached out and took her hands. He turned them palm up, looking at the damage the ropes had done, looking at the bruises he had caused by bringing her into his life. He lowered his head. He pressed his lips to her left hand, kissing the swollen knuckles. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her skin, smoke, an antiseptic. It was a prayer. It was an apology. It was a silent vow that he would spend the rest of his life making sure these hands never hurt again. He moved to her right hand, kissing the raw skin of her wrist. "I never meant for this," he whispered against her skin. "I never meant for my love to feel like violence." Elena let out a sob. She slid off the bumper of the ambulance, falling to her knees in the gravel so she was level with him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "I do not want a perfect man," she cried, clutching his bloody shirt. "I do not want a safe man. I want the man who came for me. I want the man who held my pain like it mattered. I want you, Adrian, even if you are too big, even if it hurts." Adrian wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight he thought he might crush her, but knowing she needed the pressure to feel real. "Then I will get smaller," he vowed, his voice hoarse and fierce. "If staying in your life means shrinking my empire, I will do it. I will dismantle it brick by brick. I will sell every club. I will burn every contract. I will do whatever it takes until there is room for you to breathe." Elena pulled back, looking into his eyes. "Just promise me one thing, anything," Adrian said. "Promise me no more locks," she whispered. Adrian smiled, a faint, broken thing that reached his eyes for the first time in days. No more locks, he promised. 6 months later, the Vantage nightclub was quiet. The thumping bass that used to shake the windows was gone, replaced by the soft, soulful sound of a jazz quartet playing in the corner. The crowd was different, too. The gangsters and the heavy hitters were gone, replaced by couples, tourists, and locals enjoying a drink. Adrian stood on the balcony overlooking the dance floor. He wore a suit, but it was a lighter gray, less severe. He held a glass of mineral water. He had kept his word. It had been messy, and it had been dangerous, but he had divested. The docks were sold to a legitimate shipping conglomerate. The gambling dens were shuttered. He had kept the real estate, the nightclubs and the construction firms, the clean money. He was still rich, still powerful, but the shadow that trailed him was shorter now. He felt a hand on his arm. He turned to see Elena. She looked radiant. She wore a deep blue dress that left her arms bare, revealing the faint white scars on her wrists. She didn't hide them anymore. She was back at the clinic. They had hired a new security guard, a retired cop who Adrian paid triple the market rate, but Elena ran the place. She walked with her head high. She didn't flinch when doors slammed. "Care to dance?" "Mr. Villano?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "I do not dance," Adrian said automatically. "You do for me," Elena countered, taking his hand. She led him onto the floor. It was a slow song, something with a weeping cello. Adrian pulled her close, his hand resting on the small of her back. They moved together, swaying in the half-light. It wasn't a performance. It was a communion. They didn't speak for a long time. They just existed in the space they had carved out for themselves, a space free of gunshots and sirens. Elena rested her forehead against his. She looked at his hand, the large, scarred hand that wrapped completely around hers. "You know," she murmured, tracing the veins on the back of his hand with her thumb, "you are still too big. You take up the whole room. You scare the waiters." Adrian chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "I am working on it. I am trying to be inconspicuous." "You are failing," Elena teased. "But I think I am getting used to it." She looked up at him, her expression turning serious. "Some things hurt. Adrian, healing hurts, breaking scar tissue hurts, but it is a good hurt. It means you are alive." Adrian looked down at her. He saw the woman who had shoved a construction worker out of the line of fire. He saw the woman who had stood up to a crime boss in a warehouse. He saw the love of his life. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the faded scars on her knuckles one last time. "I will stand between you and the world, Elena," he whispered, sealing the vow, "but I will make sure I never block your light." Elena smiled, and the expression was brighter than any spotlight. "Just shut up and dance, Adrian." And as the music swelled, filling the empty spaces of the room, the Mafia boss and the physical therapist turned in slow circles, a perfect, fragile balance of power and peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. You're too big. It hurts. It has been a journey through darkness and light, and I hope you enjoyed the ride with Adrian and Elena. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please drop a comment below and tell me which country or city you are tuning in from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this series and want to hear more emotional, intense, and realistic romance stories, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel. Don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts on the ending in the comments section. Did Adrian make the right choice? I read every comment and can't wait to hear what you think. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in love.